You check your phone, nothing. You check it again 10 minutes later, still nothing. Your stomach does that specific twist, the one that has no name, the one that lives somewhere between hope and humiliation. You tell yourself you don't care. You are lying, and you know it. Now picture this. It's roughly 50,000 years ago. You're standing at the edge of a gathering, two bands meeting for the first time in a season, and there's someone from the other group who keeps almost looking at you. Almost. You have no phone, you have no text to refresh. What you have is a fire, a crowd, and the exact same twist in your stomach. Here's the thing nobody tells you about dating. The anxiety didn't start with apps. It didn't start with texting, or with waiting 3 days to call, or with anything that fits in your pocket. For 99% of human history, this wasn't a hypothetical. People were doing this, reading faces, reading silence, wondering if they'd been chosen, and the honest answer, once you look at the evidence, is that your ancestors were running a version of the same program you're running right now. Let's reconstruct that gathering for a second, because it's not as vague as it sounds. Small hunter-gatherer bands, maybe 20 to 50 people, spent most of the year apart and came together at certain points. Near water, near a big seasonal food source, near a place everyone already agreed on. These gatherings weren't just parties. They were, among other things, the closest thing the Paleolithic had to a dating pool. You couldn't marry your cousin every generation without consequences, so bands needed each other. Which means somebody, somewhere, had to make an impression on a total stranger from 3 valleys over. Sound familiar? In 2017, a genetic analysis of a burial site called Sunghir in what's now Russia, roughly 34,000 years old, found something quietly enormous. The people buried there, related by community, were not closely related by blood. Researchers led by S.K. Willerslev concluded this wasn't an accident. It pointed to a deliberate system, people moving between distant groups to pair up, generation after generation. In plain terms, Ice Age humans had already figured out that inbreeding was a problem, and they solved it the same way you'd solve it. They went and met people who weren't from around here. Here's where it gets interesting. Meeting someone new wasn't the hard part. Proving you were worth the investment was. Think about Hxaro for a second. That's the name anthropologist Polly Wiesner gave to the gift exchange networks she documented among the Juhoansi people of the Kalahari. Beads, ostrich shell, small crafted objects passed between people across long distances, not as payment, but as a kind of standing relationship. You give a gift, and years later, someone gives one back. It's slow, it's patient, and researchers link these networks directly to alliance building, including the kind of alliance that turns into a marriage between bands. You weren't swiping, you were investing, sometimes for years, in the idea that this connection might matter later. There was no read receipt. There was just trust that the thread wouldn't be dropped. And this is where it gets stranger, because your brain hasn't caught up to the fact that any of this changed. Anthropologist Helen Fisher at Rutgers has spent decades arguing that human attraction runs on 3 separate systems, not one: lust, romantic obsession, and long-term attachment, each with its own chemistry, each evolved on a different timeline, each capable of firing without the other two. That's why you can want someone, be obsessed with someone, and feel deeply bonded to someone, and have those be 3 completely different people, or 3 completely different feelings about the same person. Your ancestors weren't simpler than you. They had the same 3 systems, fighting the same 3 battles, just without a swipe function to blur them together. So how did you actually try to get noticed, 50,000 years ago, with no compliments typed into a text box? You showed it. Ochre, that reddish pigment humans have been mining and trading for well over 100,000 years, shows up on bodies and objects across the Paleolithic world, and while archaeologists debate every use of it, body ornamentation and self-decoration is one of the leading interpretations. Shell beads. Carved figurines. The so-called Venus figures, the Venus of Willendorf, around 25,000 years old, found in Austria, is the most famous, are, according to archaeologists like April Noel at the University of Victoria, tied to fertility, symbolism, and social meaning, not some simple ancient beauty pageant. These weren't decorations for decoration's sake. They were signals: status, health, fertility, group identity, all broadcast the same way your outfit, your gym selfie, or your carefully chosen profile photo broadcasts something today. You have just swapped ochre for lighting. Let that sit for a second. The impulse to curate how you're seen by someone you want to impress is not a modern invention. It is close to as old as symbolic thought itself. But before any of that signaling mattered, there was a much simpler problem, and it's one dating app solved without you noticing how strange it used to be. You had to actually be in the same place as another single person, in a band of 30 or 40 people, most of whom you'd known since birth, most of whom you were related to in some way. Your dating pool at home was, bluntly, tiny. That's the real, practical reason those seasonal gatherings mattered so much. They weren't just social events, they were the entire dating market for hundreds of miles, compressed into a few weeks a year. Miss the gathering, and you might be waiting another full year for your next real shot. No wonder people showed up wearing their best ochre. And it wasn't only romantic. This is the part that gets skipped. Courtship in these gatherings was tangled up with survival math nobody was pretending to ignore. Choosing a partner from a distant band meant future access to their territory in a bad season, their knowledge of a different landscape, their tools, their allies. It's tempting to imagine ancient attraction as pure instinct, animal and simple. It wasn't. It was instinct layered with strategy. The same way your attraction today gets quietly cross-examined by questions about stability, ambition, whether this person actually has their life together. You've just swapped territory rights for a steady job. Now, you might be picturing this whole thing as either brutal, some kind of grab-and-drag cartoon, or as chaste and simple, one man, one woman, forever, case closed. Neither holds up well. The clearest picture anthropologists can offer comes from living hunter-gatherer societies studied in enormous depth, like the Hadza of Tanzania, documented for decades by Frank Marlowe. Hadza relationships tend towards serial monogamy, real, committed pair bonds, but one's either partner can end, and often does, over the course of a lifetime. Not chaos, not rigid permanence either. Something closer to what a huge number of people actually live today, whether or not they'd put it in those words. Here's the part nobody tells you. Rejection was not a smaller wound, just because it happened without a screen. If a relationship failed, you didn't just lose a partner. In a band of 30 people, you potentially lost access to that person's entire family, their resources, their knowledge, their protection. Breakups had stakes that could ripple through your whole survival network. Compare that to today, where a breakup mostly cost you a Spotify playlist and the will to open your phone. Ours is, honestly, the easier version. We just don't feel that way, because the wiring underneath hasn't updated. And that's really the twist in all of this, isn't it? We assume connection got harder over time, more overwhelming, more anxious, more of a minefield. But the minefield was already there. A gatherer offering Hxaro beads to someone from another band, hoping it lands the way they mean it, and someone tonight typing a message and deleting it 3 times before sending. Those two people, separated by 50,000 years, are doing almost exactly the same math. Will this be received? Will this be enough? Am I going to be chosen? The honest answer is, we don't know exactly what it felt like to be turned down at a Paleolithic gathering. Nobody left us a diary. What we do know is the architecture, the biology, the gift networks, the ornamentation, the alliances between bands, and every piece of it points the same direction. This wasn't primitive. It was the same operating system you're running, just without the notifications. So here's a picture worth sitting with. A Juhoense woman 2,000 years ago hands over a small beaded gift to someone from a distant camp, hoping it says what she means it to say. Somewhere tonight, someone is drafting a message, deleting it, and starting over. Almost nothing connects those two moments. Almost nothing except the exact same hope, wearing a different outfit. You still check your phone? Nothing yet. But you're not doing anything new. You're doing the oldest thing there is, waiting to find out if you were chosen. Your ancestors waited by firelight. You wait by a blue light. The wait is the same wait it always was. So tell me, if you'd had to prove you were worth choosing with nothing but a gift, a look, and a fire between you and a stranger, do you think you'd have done better than you do now, or worse? Drop your honest answer below. And if this cracked open how you think about dating, there's a lot more where this came from. Stick around.